Hello, photography friends. If you're new in these parts, I'm Hayley, founder of Creative Photo Folk, the home of creative photography. And this week you'll learn how to capture hilarious photos of your dog catching treats. Now, I'm a creative photography specialist, not a pet photographer. So trying this with my inexperienced and highly anxious rescue dog was a bit of a recipe for disaster. However, we learnt plenty in the process to help you have more success. So there's two ways to freeze the high-speed movement of your dog catching treats. The first, as you probably know, is to use a fast shutter speed. But this isn't as reliable as the second way, which offers more control: studio lighting. When you're in a dark location, your camera can only see the moment your flash fires. So if you set your flash to a lower power, like 1/8, instead of full power, this lets off an extremely fast burst of light, allowing you to freeze split-second motion. This makes your shutter speed irrelevant. But if you add in any ambient light, your camera then captures that light, which could create motion blur. So for this trick to work, you'll need a dark location like a garage or outdoors at night, and 1 or 2 flashes. I'm using a Canon Speedite and a Godox AD200. To begin, set up a backdrop in the color of your choice. I decided to use black because it's easier to work with, but I'd love to try this with white too, although white requires more lighting to prevent it from looking grey. As usual, I just used roller blinds from a hardware store, which I attached to my cheap backdrop stand using clamps. The problem with using roller blinds, though, is that they're not long enough to cover the floor. So I made sure to not raise it up too high, which gave more length for the dog to sit on. However, this caused a few problems. It meant my dog had to be very close to the background, which caused the lights to spill on the backdrop. Plus, him sitting on it created some distracting creases and made the bottom really quite dirty. So if I were to shoot this again, I would move the dog farther away from the background and use a closer or tighter crop so that you can't see the floor. Now, for the lighting, I placed my Godox AD200 in a square softbox, which was 90 degrees to the right of the backdrop. These were placed on cheap stands, which I made sure were sandbagged in case my dog got overexcited. As my dog is dark in color, I placed a second optional Canon Speedite facing his back to stop him from blending into the backdrop. Now, because I knew that my dog would have very little patience, I couldn't test the lighting beforehand. So there was a bit too much light spilling on that backdrop, which I needed to fix in post. This again could have been prevented by moving the dog farther away. Both of these lights were set to 1/8 power. I shot in my garage and left the room lights on so we could see. But before switching on my lighting, I made sure my exposure was completely dark so it wasn't picking up that ambient light. I used 1/200th of a second, which was the highest I could go with my flash's sync speed, f9 to give some reasonable depth, and ISO 400 to compensate for the lower powered flash. I used my 24-70mm wide lens and tried to keep this around 24mm, positioned as close to the dog as possible. The reason for this is because the wide angle distortion creates a comical look. But in hindsight, I didn't love this crop and it made the rest of his body look too slender. So I wouldn't bother with that again. Back button focus was essential for this technique because it allowed me to easily refocus on the dog's eye or mouth for every throw. If your camera has animal eye tracking, that will work great too. All right, to the fun stuff. First, you want to get down low to the dog's level and shoot from slightly above their eyes. It's best if you're sitting on a low chair. Place a couple of handfuls of relatively compact treats into a container. We used kibble, an assortment of biscuits, and some squares of cheese, his favorite. If your dog has never caught treats before, this is not the time to teach them. So make sure they're comfortable by practicing daily for a couple of weeks beforehand. When you're all set up, bring them into the space and toss them a few treats first with lots of praise to get them used to the position and lighting. It took about 2/3 of my shoot for my dog to understand where he was expected to sit each time. Also have some water handy if they need a drink. You can try throwing the treats yourself, but there's no way I could manage shooting and throwing at the same time, so I recruited some help. Get your helper to stand 1 or 2 steps back because a longer throw helps the dog see the treat better. When you throw the treats too high, it causes the dog to put their head up so you don't see their eyes. But it's the wild anticipation in their eyes that is the funniest part. So try and throw underhanded from down low. Throwing slightly from the side instead of the front also helps you see their eyes better. As for shooting, you're only going to get 1 shot per throw. So get your helper to count to 3 before each throw, which also helps your dog know when to catch. This is difficult to get right, especially on your first try. So plan to walk away with only 2 to 3 great shots. You could try spraying and praying, but this will just overheat your flashes, and you'll get better results by anticipating the perfect moment. We had about 30 minutes of shooting until my dog started to tire. In editing, I used Lightroom to bring down the highlights and raise the shadows. If you followed my advice and avoided making the same mistakes I did, hopefully you won't now need to head into Photoshop to fix your background. But if this is an area you do need help with, my Editing Essentials course has a module where I show you how to use Photoshop's retouching tools to clean up and extend backdrops. Even though this technique is a bit advanced, it's a great way to practice studio lighting while hanging out with your best friend. So thanks for watching, and make sure to give my pup a like and subscribe for being such a good boy. Happy creating!